12 years after the Iraq War, America has pulled out combat troops. But there are almost 3,000 so-called advisors back in the country, helping to train and bolster Iraqi forces to battle ISIS. I'm joined now by Democratic Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. She served 2 tours of duty in the Middle East, and Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger, who served as an Air Force pilot in Iraq. Thank you both for your service, and thank you both for being here this morning. Before we get to Iraq and ISIS, let me just ask you about the story we've been talking about this morning, which is Bibi Netanyahu, Barack Obama, and how that bad relationship could well impact the peace process and bring it to a dead halt. Let me start first with you, Congressman Kinzinger. Do you feel this is a dangerous place we're in right now? It's
not a good place, but I think the peace process seemed like it was at a halt long before Netanyahu ran for re-election. And so, you know, look, it's always surprising to me when the president is upset about election rhetoric.
So open.
Because it always happens.
Out there, right?
Yeah, and so it'll be interesting, but at the end of the day, we have a very strong relationship that'll be maintained.
I agree. I mean, if you look at Congress, you look at some of the resolutions and pieces of legislation that are put forward, both Democrats and Republicans from all sectors of the ideological spectrum are by and large united on the importance of continuing the strong U.S.-Israel partnership. And when you look in the past as well, when there have been differences between the leaders of our 2 countries, we've always been able to overcome that and continue to move forward with that shared objective.
But it was your colleague Steve King who sort of said, raised the question of whether American Jews are
I could never defend what Steve King says, and especially in this case. But, you know, look, I think it's very obvious that we can have, folks in our parties that say different things on both sides. But it's a united Republican and Democrat on the issue of Israel.
And, we're originally wanting to have you folks on the show because it is 12 years since the Iraq War began. And the story this week that seems to be growing is what's going on there and the growth of ISIS growing more powerful and more deadly, launching attacks in Tunisia, in Yemen. This morning, we got word that they're calling for beheadings in the United States. Are you concerned that the scope of this problem has grown so much while a solution to ISIS seems to be slipping away?
Well, I think that's exactly the point, is that as we look at this threat of ISIS and Islamic extremism conducting these violent acts of terrorism, not only in Iraq and Syria, but as we're seeing now in other parts of the world and on soft targets like we just saw in Tunisia, it goes back to the underlying question, which is, what is our strategy to defeat this threat? We have to go back to recognizing that this is a military component, absolutely, to being able to defeat this threat, but there also has to be an understanding of the sectarian civil war and the political solutions that will be necessary to do that, as well as the ideological element that's allowing ISIS to continue to grow, to continue to recruit, not only in the Middle East, but all of these foreign fighters who are going there.
We've been training Iraqi forces for years, as you 2 know better than I do, and they greatly outnumber ISIS. Yet they can't seem to even take back Tikrit, from ISIS. So the question is, do you foresee a day in the near future when the Iraqi forces would actually be capable of driving ISIS out without U.S. combat forces there with them?
Possibly, but let's look. So when I left Iraq in 2009...
Possibly is not...
Well, I know. That's all I can give you, because when I left Iraq in 2009, we had the war won. I mean, Iraqi forces were actually acting pretty well. We had the military component figured out, and when I was flying, we were, finding bad guys and doing mop-up operations. I went back just 6 months ago as a congressman, and to see what happened there is disappointing. So with Iraqi forces, look, when we left in 2011, Maliki basically made the force a secular force for Shias, had leadership folks that were in there that had no ability to lead troops. And so what happens is leadership melted away in the face of ISIS, and as any low-level soldier is going to do, if their leaders run, they're going to run too. So that has got to be fixed.
So it's because we didn't leave a residual force.
Residual force was important, but I think we lost the ability to influence the Iraqi military, and it became secular.
And then the question is, can we get it back?
The residual force, I think, is a sidebar point. The underlying issue there is is exactly what you mentioned. The fact that starting with the Bush administration, continuing now, the United States has supported propping up this Shia-led Iranian-influenced government in Baghdad that has completely oppressed the Sunni people, creating this oxygen for ISIS to be able to come in and tell them, look, we'll help you.
What's your option? Who else do you back, though?
Well, this is where we should empower each of the different people. We shouldn't be choosing sides and funding and propping up the Shias versus the Sunnis in this sectarian war.
Well, I agree with that. And, you know, keep in mind, up until the residual force, and I think it's why, not to continually revisit history, but this is why it's important to talk about why pulling the residual force out was bad, was because we disengaged politically with Iraq, too. And once we disengaged politically, Iran engaged, and also you had the sectarian impulses that engaged. I mean, it takes a while to get this right.
And let me just read to you both something that David Petraeus said this week that kind of struck me. He commanded troops, as you well know, during the surge in 2007 to 2008. Here's what he said. He said, "It is impossible to return to Iraq without a keen sense of opportunities lost. This includes the squandering of what we and our coalition and Iraqi partners paid such a heavy cost to achieve." This has to have a lot of meaning for both of you. You say you were just back. How do you respond to what the general said? Do you
well,
feel
I think Adam is of the same mind as I am. In our hearts every day, we carry with us this incredibly high human cost of war, of the friends who we lost there, who didn't get to come back home. And it's, for me, why I feel so strongly about it. As we look at the future, as we look at the question that we're dealing with right now about the United States' role in defeating ISIS and defeating this Islamic extremist threat, is that we don't repeat the same mistakes of the past, that we truly understand who our enemy is, what's driving them, so that we can come to a clear and effective strategy to defeat them and protect the American people.
Was that your feeling when you went back?
Oh, yeah. I mourned it. I mean, it was heartbreaking to see, you know, a 13-year-old girl with her siblings that are younger than her because she lost her parents to ISIS. I mean, that kind of stuff is heartbreaking. But as Tulsi said, and I agree, we do have to be clear-eyed about the real enemy in this. And I think, as General Petraeus said, we have the Shia militia is an issue, the Iranian influence in Iraq is an issue, and that's why it's important for us to step up, because Iraq is literally looking out and saying, we've got to survive here, and that's why they're reaching to Iran. But Iran's help doesn't come without a very steep price.
And I think the question of how we step up is really what we're considering here. And when we look at the Sunni tribesmen who came to Washington just, I think, about a month ago, saying, we need your help, we need arms, we need weapons to be able to fight against ISIS. We look at the battles that are going on right now in Tikrit and what we expect will happen in Mosul, and the fact that unless there's a plan for the Sunnis to take charge of these towns, of these Sunni-dominated communities, we're not going to see ISIS diminish in Iraq.
Well, thanks to both of you for being here this morning, and thank you again for your service.